Hello and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. US and Israel have now called their teams back from the talks that were ongoing regarding Gaza with Hamas. Both have blamed Hamas for their latest move. This comes as conditions in Gaza are deteriorating and people are dying of hunger, according to media reports. French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that it will recognize the state of Palestine formally, starting from upcoming UN meeting in September. However, Israel and the US have shown anger towards this move by France. Iran will meet Germany, Britain, and France today to discuss and resume the nuclear talks. This comes amid warnings by UN of snapback sanctions on Iran. President Donald Trump was seen pressing the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to cut interest rates during their 10th visit to the Federal Reserve, criticizing the central bank's $2.5 billion headquarters renovation, according to media reports, as the Fed is expected to hold rates steady at next week's policy meeting. Thai military has reported fresh clashes with Cambodian troops along the border. Thailand said its forces responded with appropriate supporting fire based on the tactical situation, now marking a second straight day of escalating tensions. The United States has lifted sanctions on several allies of Myanmar's military junta after its chief praised Donald Trump and sought relief. Human Rights Watch called the move extremely worrying, warning it may signal a shift in U.S. policy towards a regime accused of genocide and a 2021 coup. A top U.S. Justice Department official interrogated Ghislaine Maxwell for hours, according to media reports, amid growing pressure on President Donald Trump from MAGA critics over his handling of the Epstein case. Maxwell, the jailed accomplice of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, remains a central figure in the ongoing investigation. Syrian and Israeli officials held US-mediated talks in Paris to discuss de-escalation amid clashes in southern Syria. According to US envoy Tom Barak, Envoy Barak has also said that the dialogue achieved its goal, as both sides committed to continuing efforts to reduce tensions. The United States has withdrawn its negotiators from ceasefire talks in Doha, joining Israel in a sharp escalation of diplomatic tensions. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff has blamed Hamas for stalling the process, saying that the group is not acting in good faith and that Washington will now consider alternative options. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reaffirmed his commitment to securing a ceasefire and the release of hostages, but accused Hamas of blocking a deal and trying to dictate terms that endanger Israel's security. Negotiators have been in Qatar for weeks amid growing pressure over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where warnings of mass starvations continue. We're joined by two guests today, Jordan Cope, he's a Middle East affairs expert, and another guest, Noor Osama Nugali, he's an assistant editor-in-chief of Arab News. Both of you, thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, I would like to start with Jordan. Jordan, so the United States and Israel have now both pulled out of these talks. Does this shared stance risk undermining potential peace efforts in the region?
Israel's first and foremost priority will be the return of its own citizens. 50 supposedly remain in Gaza. It remains yet to be determined how many of them are actually alive, approximately 22 estimated to intelligence reports. Regardless of peace prospects in the region, it seems that the United States is standing by Israel's side, especially after Hamas has tried to ultimately withhold on its end of the agreement in terms of the conditions, the United States has consistently lost patience when it has come to Hamas. Now, there have been negotiations in the making now for almost 2 years effectively as this conflict has continued. And while many have remained hopeful throughout that we were always on the cusp of yet another ceasefire and another return of the Israeli hostages, the reality is that Hamas wants to continue this war for as long as possible to delegitimize Israel as it continues to have to fight a war that it did not want to fight following October 7th. And additionally, it allows Hamas to continue to allow itself to represent itself to the Palestinian people as the arms bearer of their cause, given that it's incredibly difficult for Israel to achieve at least one of its military objectives, even though it has achieved many others. And so while there are rumors that there are potential normalization deals in the pipeline between Israel and perhaps also with Syria, even though the conditions with Syria seem to have deteriorated in recent weeks, and perhaps even with countries such as Saudi Arabia or Mauritania in the long-term future, Israel's first and foremost concern will be defending and protecting its citizens, and all other talk for now is unfortunately irrelevant.
Thank you. Now we go to Noor. Noor, now both the US and Israel are blaming Hamas for stalling ceasefire negotiations. Given the humanitarian crisis in Gaza that's unfolding now, is there any possibility for constructive dialogue? Still, can we see any hope about dialogues with Hamas?
Thank you so much for having me today. I think at this point, 2 years later, we've had enough with the blame game and who started what. We're seeing on the ground as journalists what's taking place. Many are calling it a genocide as Israel is wiping Gaza off the banks of what is now a demolished Palestine. They are starving children to death. We see many that are being amputated, and reports are saying that the most number of amputee children are man-made because of what's happening in Israel right now and Palestine. Of course, this comes on the heels of France recognizing Palestine as a country. Some are calling it a bold diplomatic move. Already 142 countries have already recognized the state of Palestine. Saudi Arabia and France are to hold conference next week at the UN on a ministerial level, and we hope to see more of this is happening. I think the whole world, from what I'm seeing as a journalist, is recognizing the plot of what the Palestinian people are going through. The kingdom for years and decades has stood by the Palestinian people, the Palestinian leadership, and has always called for a two-state solution. And will we see this happen? I truly hope so. For the sake and safety of the Palestinians, will this diplomatic move bring on actual news on the ground and real action to see the safety of the Palestinian people? We are all praying for that. And it's just a waiting game now to see what will happen.
I would like to take Jordan's take on this one as well. Jordan, now both the US and Israel are blaming Hamas for starting ceasefire negotiation. So given the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, is there any possibility for constructive dialogue with Hamas?
First, before I answer that question, I would like to absolutely rebut in the strongest terms the claim that genocide is happening in Gaza. We have military experts such as John Spencer who have noted that this war has been one of the most humanely fought in modern memory, especially considering that it's occurring in one of the most densely populated areas in the world. According to the United Nations in general, in terms of modern day warfare, a tragedy, nonetheless, whenever it happens, 90% of all people who end up in casualty statistics are generally, unfortunately, civilians. Israel in this recent war has managed to limit, despite having to fight in tunnels, which is one of the most dangerous forms of tunnel warfare. Even so, Israel has managed to keep the combatant to civilian ratio at approximately 1 to 1.5%. I find it mildly hypocritical that one could allege genocide while also attending a conference in China, which is ethnically cleansing the Uyghurs as we currently speak. Regarding negotiations with Hamas, Hamas has been difficult throughout this whole process. Hamas is a non-rational actor. Hamas killed 1,200 people on October 7th and in some days to follow, burning many of their victims alive, raping many of the victims, sometimes even beheading them. This is not a rational organization. The reality of the matter is, unfortunately, 50% of the Palestinian people, according to a recent survey, according to the PSR's recent survey, have suggested that they still support the October 7th attacks, that they still support efforts to ethnically cleanse the Jews. And as we've seen recently in southern Syria, where the Druze have also faced ethnic cleansing from Sunni Islamist groups, it is beyond shocking to see the lack of action around the world and France's current effort to try to recognize a Palestinian state in light of one of the worst and most gruesome, grotesque terrorist attacks in my lifetime sets a terrible precedent that terrorism is the way forward, that terrorism, that rape, that beheading victims, that burning them alive is the way forward to achieving statehood, and that's simply unacceptable, especially from a country that continues to have colonies all throughout the world, whether it be in South America or whether it be in island territories elsewhere. International law clearly establishes that to achieve statehood, four conditions must be met. And unfortunately, the Palestinian leadership has not established all four of those. I do not expect, though, going back to your question, that Hamas is any bit of a rational actor and is willing to engage in negotiations ultimately to release the hostages. It's in their best, in the most perverse world that we live in, it is in their best circumstances not to release the hostages, because they know that they can ultimately advance their goal of delegitimizing Israel, its ability to protect their citizens, ultimately allowing Hamas to carry on forward with its ultimate goal, as stated in its charter, of destroying Israel and the Jewish people.
Thank you, Jordan, for sharing that. We'll come back to both of you in a minute now. We look at a significant move made by France. In a landmark move, which French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that France will officially recognize a Palestinian state this September at the United Nations General Assembly. This would make France the first G7 nation to take that step. Macron has called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the release of hostages, and urgent humanitarian aid access. Palestinian officials and Hamas praised the decision as a step towards justice and self-determination. Saudi Arabia hailed it as historic and urged other countries to follow. While Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said it strengthens the two-state solution against Netanyahu's policies. This is how Palestinians are reacting to the news.
اعتراف فرنسا بالدولة الفلسطينية هو هذا التزام أخلاقي من فرنسا، دولة الحرية والدولة التي تنادي بالقانون وسيادة القانون وانضمامها بالقانون الدولي، فبالتالي هذا الاعتراف هو نصر سياسي للشعب الفلسطيني، ومطلوب أيضا من فرنسا أن تتخذ أيضا إجراءات عقابية ضد دولة الاحتلال على الجرائم المقترفة في قطاع غزة.
ممنونين كثير لهذا الموقف الفرنسي. كان في مجموعة من المقدمات اللي وقت زيارة الرئيس الفرنسي لجرحى غزة في مصر، وكان عنده تصريحات جيدة، كانت تصريحاته إنسانية وحقيقية، وحاول أنه يحط النقاط على الحروف. احنا بنتمنى أنه هذا الاعتراف ياخذ لمحل لوقف المقتلة اللي في قطاع غزة. هذا الاعتراف يؤدي إلى اعتراف جملة أو الكثير من الدول أوروبا والعالم بفلسطين.
But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu strongly condemned the move, saying it rewards terror and risks creating a new Iranian proxy. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called it a reckless decision. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Jordan Cope. He's a Middle East affairs expert, and Noor Osama Nagali. She's an assistant editor-in-chief of Arab News. Now, Noor, I would like to see your reaction on this news. You've already kind of touched down on it a little bit in our previous discussion, but can you tell us more about your reaction on this news?
As we've been covering this issue for many years, especially the past 2 years since the war on Gaza started, we've seen lots of the world really shedding light and seeing exactly what's taking place in Gaza. People are not blind to the starvation, to the killing, to the distraught that's taking place. They're seeing homes being abolished. They are seeing children being orphaned. And it's unfortunate. Yes, war does happen. But on this level, we find humanitarian aid, which even Saudi Arabia has sent via King Salman Relief Center, just on the borders, not really reaching the people, and now they're starving to death. So when an announcement comes from from France, initiating that they will recognize Palestine as a state, it is more than welcomed. Obviously, we look forward to seeing what's going to take place next week at the conference that's being held by Saudi Arabia and France in New York in the UN, inshallah, and we hope that good news will follow. I believe everyone in the world at this moment just wants a ceasefire, wants to ensure the safety of all, and hopes and prays for peace and prosperity for all. But we cannot have that happen unless the ceasefire takes place, unless the Palestinians' plot is recognized and they are humanely treated, even though they are going through this. It's no easy task, but the whole world is watching, and we pray for the best.
Yes, and now I would like to see Jordan's reaction on this news, France's recognition of a Palestinian state.
I think it's a morally terrible precedent. Simply put, this war could have ended 2 years ago had Hamas simply surrendered and released all of the hostages. Hamas on October 7th, as I need to remind people because it doesn't seem that the Israeli hostages are much of a concern when it comes to other speakers, but there have been 50 people who have been in the depths of hell underneath the Gaza Strip, which had every chance to develop itself over the past decades, and the billions of dollars of humanitarian aid that have come in. We talk about humanitarian sentiment all the time. The question is, why did the Palestinian leadership not develop its own people? It had so many opportunities to do so. Simply put, because of internal corruption, billions of dollars go into Palestinian leaders. But when it comes to actual international law matters, let's move away from the terrible, morally reckless decision that this will ultimately create precedent for. It will reward terrorism. It will reward the Hamas terrorists for their attacks on October 7th. It will reward the Palestinian people, 50% of whom, unto today, still support the October 7th attacks. It's a significant deviation as well from international law. As noted in Knox versus the Palestine Liberation Organization in a US district court, the PLO and its territories simply do not meet the definition of statehood as defined under the Montevideo Convention. There are 2 specific criteria out of the 4 listed that the PLO and its leadership, or the Palestinian Authority and its leadership, have failed to establish. Those being a government that can assert control over its territory, and in addition to that, the ability to exercise international relations. And as we've learned under the Oslo Accords and under the interim agreement, these agreements specifically prevent Palestinian leadership from exercising these privileges. But going back to France, I want to talk specifically about Macron, a president who has 19% approval rating. It is the lowest approval rating of any French president in the history of the Republic. It is one of the lowest approval ratings in the entirety of the world. And a reason, in part, for why his approval rating is so low is because he is a leader who has failed to demonstrate a moral backbone, to demonstrate strength when terrorist attacks continue to consume his country, when the Middle East is in turmoil, and instead of advocating for democratic allies of France, he continues to advocate on behalf of solutions that award terrorism, that award rape, that award beheading victims, that award burning them alive, and that neglect allies that have fought wars, even in the most difficult of circumstances, making sure to protect civilian lives as much as possible, and to ultimately damn allies of France that have gone well and beyond to ensure the inflow of over 2.1 million tons of aid. Israel has allowed more humanitarian aid into Gaza during this war than it previously allowed.
Jordan, please allow me to, we'll come back to you for our next guest discussion. And that was Noor and Jordan with us. Thank you very much for joining us today. Jordan, please stay with us, else we'll come back to you in a minute. Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced he will hold an emergency call with France and Germany to address the dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Starmer is urging a ceasefire and advocating for steps towards Palestinian statehood as a path to a two-state solution. He also stated that the situation in Gaza 21 months after the October 2023 Hamas attack has reached new depths of suffering, with warning signs of imminent famine. Starmer describes the situation as an unspeakable humanitarian catastrophe. Israel faces increasing pressure to allow massive humanitarian aid, while indirect talks between Israel and Hamas in Qatar have yet to produce results. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Jordan Cope. He's a Middle East expert. Thank you, Jordan, for staying with us. Now, given the ongoing failure of indirect talks, what specific steps can the UK, France, and Germany take together to address this humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
When it comes to leadership in the Western world, sometimes there are too many cooks simply in the kitchen. Unfortunately, the UK, the France, and Germany are no longer as relevant as they think they are. They are countries that are declining in power. However, they are countries at the same time that think that they are of such superior importance to the rest of the world. At this point, I would leave negotiations to the United States and aid efforts to the United States. Part of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation's creation was ultimately to dispossess one of these strongholds that Hamas had over the people of Gaza, which was to control all aid, which Hamas at the same time corruptly swindled and invested into building a tunnel system underneath Gaza that is larger than many metro systems around the world, consisting of over 500 kilometers of tunnels underneath the Gaza Strip. What needs to happen in terms of humanitarian aid is that the GHF needs to continue in its mission. It has since provided over 90 million meals since it was established in late May. We need to ensure the protection of GHF officials whom have been attacked by Hamas, by both grenade, by gunfire, and by threats. We need to make sure that they can continue to distribute meals and to provide and sustain the people of Gaza. We need to remove rumors that have gotten in the way, that have tried to sabotage these efforts, because Hamas is so desperate, as Israel in the war has advanced to controlling now almost 80% of the Gaza Strip. It knows that its power is relinquishing, and we need to ultimately make sure that it does not ever once again retain the ability to maintain a stronghold over the Gaza people. And in addition to that, we need to make sure that the United Nations is pressured to stop letting food rot under its management. It has let tens of thousands of pounds of food go to waste because of political infighting and ulterior political interest. Especially it's upset with the disbandment of UNRWA.
Jordan, thank you very much for sharing that and staying with us throughout our news. That was Jordan Cope. Now we move on to our next news. A top U.S. Justice Department official questioned Ghislaine Maxwell for hours on Thursday in Tallahassee as part of a renewed inquiry into the Jeffrey Epstein case. Maxwell, who's serving a 20-year sentence for trafficking underage girls for Epstein, answered all questions without invoking privilege. According to her lawyer, David Marcus, here is what he had to say.
Day today with the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche and Ghislaine Maxwell. First, we want to thank the Deputy Attorney General for being so professional with all of us and for meeting with us. He took a full day and asked a lot of questions, and Ms. Maxwell answered every single question. She never stopped, she never invoked a privilege, she never declined to answer. She answered all the questions truthfully, honestly, and to the best of her ability. And that's all the comment we're going to have today about the meeting. We don't want to comment about the substance of the meeting for obvious reasons, and we'll go from there. So thank you all so much.
The meeting comes amid fresh scrutiny of Trump's past ties to Epstein. The Wall Street Journal recently reported Trump's name appeared in DOJ-reviewed Epstein files. No wrongdoing has been alleged, but Trump filed a $10 billion defamation suit against the paper over its reporting. Democratic lawyers raised concerns about potential political interference, with Senate leaders warning of a corrupt deal to protect Trump. A recent DOJ memo claimed Epstein left no client list, committed suicide, and that no further investigation is warranted. Findings that many remain skeptical of, especially among Trump supporters. Now we're joined by Irina Zuckerman. She's a senior journalist joining us live from New York. Thank you, Irina, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, Maxwell has agreed to answer all the questions without invoking privilege. How significant is that, and what impact could this have on investigation and future legal proceedings around Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, it's clear that she is potentially looking to cut some sort of a deal, or hopes that her testimony will provide her with some sort of a privilege regarding her 20-year-long sentence. What is curious about it is that Maxwell this is the first time Maxwell is being interviewed by anyone. Neither the Justice Department nor state investigators have previously questioned her, and she has already served 3 years, despite a myriad of state and federal reports and investigations related to Epstein, and despite the fact that she was considered to be his closest associate. Now, many are skeptical whether her responses would actually yield any new information, but that is not necessarily the case. Much depends on what the administration is hoping to get out of it. And there are several possible scenarios, and some of them are potentially overlapping. First, the Biden era inertia around Epstein-related prosecutions, including those involving politically sensitive figures, could be coming to an end. There may be a renewed incentive and the political will, at least among some in the Justice Department, to reopen old cases that embarrass legacy institutions. The Epstein network, which included royalty, academia, Wall Street, and elite political circles, remains one of the most radioactive files in the federal archive, and we've seen the Trump administration try to put an end to this story. If this interrogation hints at cooperation, it could mark the beginning of a new prosecutorial strategy, using Maxwell as a cooperating witness to implicate others, possibly including federal or intelligence-linked actors. Another possibility is this could signal an effort by the Justice Department to counter narratives of elite impunity.
Irina, we will come back to you in a minute for our next discussion. Thank you for sharing that. Please stay with us. Now, President Donald Trump visited the Federal Reserve's headquarters in Washington, clashing with Federal Chair Jerome Powell over the cost of renovations. Trump has criticized this project and now estimated to cost $3.1 billion and demanded lower interest rates. Despite previous threats to fire Powell, Trump has said that he did not intend to remove him. The visit came just days before the Fed's rate-setting meeting, where rates are expected to remain unchanged. Trump has pressed for a 3% rate cut, while Powell remained calm. The Fed says the renovation runs over budget due to unexpected challenges and inflation-driven costs. Let's take a listen to what Trump has said.
Well, I'd love him to lower interest rates. Other than that, what can I tell you? Because to do that is a big move, and I just don't think it's necessary. And I believe that he's going to do the right thing. I believe that the chairman is going to do the right thing. I mean, it may be a little too late, as the expression goes, but I believe he's going to do the right thing.
Now we go back to our guest discussion with senior journalist Irina Zuckerman. Irina, thank you for staying with us. Now, Trump's visit to the Federal Reserve has occurred just before a key rate-setting meeting. How does such public confrontation affect the credibility and independence of the Federal Reserve Chair in the eyes of U.S. citizens?
Quite frankly, I think many perceive it as independence being in question, with Trump repeatedly putting extreme pressure on Powell to lower interest rates, and the other one, and Powell resisting because he does not believe those lowering interest rates will lead to anything but inflation and economic issues at this time. Trump, on the other hand, believes that lowering the rates would bring him popularity and allow more Americans to afford a range of economic benefits, including mortgages. There is a significant concern that if Trump continues putting pressure on Powell, he will exceed his own authority. And certainly, if Trump fires Powell, as he has threatened or looked into doing, what we saw today is not merely a policy dispute or personal confrontation, but an institutional showdown. Trump's economic strategy, favoring aggressive rate cuts, liquidity easing, and manufacturing-focused growth, or at least rhetoric of such growth, contrasts with Powell's much more technocratic and stability-oriented approach. The result is a power struggle over the control of the U.S. financial system. The Federal Reserve is supposed to be independent, but now we're seeing the U.S. president actively meddling in this and actively trying to take control of the economy, which has historically never ended well.
Thank you very much, Irina Zuckerman, for joining us today and sharing your insight throughout our news. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.